CEO at Woodbine Entertainment in Ontario. Uh, he played with me at Brown, so he's a hockey guy. Played 2 years in the American Hockey League. He's a really uh, sort of soft-spoken, emotionally intelligent guy who's done a terrific job at Woodbine with their diversity and inclusion environment. And the first thing he said to me when I was just trying to clarify with him, like, are you really interested in doing this? CEO or board or whatever. And he said, he'd be really interested in being on the board. But the first thing he said to me was, he was reading through some of the stuff on Hockey Canada's internet, and he said their mission statement is a bunch of fluff, really. And the first thing that he thinks they need to tackle is a very pointed, purposeful sense of purpose, and to your point, a why and a what. And so I'm really hoping I touched base with Cassie Campbell and Wick and Mel Davidson and reached out to Gina and Jana Hefford. And I really hope we could generate, and Kelly Rudy, I really hope we could generate some momentum to get his name out there as someone who would be a really terrific board member, because he's a hockey guy through and through, but he's been outside of hockey virtually his whole career. He's trained as a lawyer. And anyway, that's a long interjection. I'm sorry, but I totally agree. It's a big, big job, and they need a really purposeful mission statement so they can move forward. And the ethical coaching for me is job one and should be the driver of that mission statement.
I can't find the words to kind of support or go along with what you're saying. When I was talking with Wally yesterday. One of the things that is important is to have credible people involved, like Wick, like Cassie Campbell, like Kelly Rudy. Yeah, like maybe even try to interest Wayne Gretzky. Hockey personalities that are recognized like in a split second, that kind of buy into this approach of influencing. We're not going to tell them what to do, but we should be a voice that helps those people who are working to, it's pivoting, right? It's like turning the ship. And one of the things that I was listening to yesterday, I heard a comment about branding. And Hockey Canada probably should change its name so that the anchor that has been attached to it disappears.
That's a really good point. And I was thinking the other day, maybe they should go back to the future and rebrand themselves as CHA, Canadian Hockey Association.
Uh, Whatever it takes to kind of take the spotlight away from what has been going on, because now, you know how it is, media kind of amplifies things. And, like, I'd like to think that 99% of the people involved mean well and do well. It's the few that mess it up for the many. And if we, like, I'm speaking from knowledge because that's what I do with teams. That's what I do with organizations, is working on a, like you described it, sharp, simple, very targeted vision that this entity wants to create, and why we want to do that. And I think the why is pretty simple. We want to use sports because, Wally says that, and I'm sure you're all in the same boat when it comes to that. Sports is such a good vehicle to create good citizenship, but it has to be done in a way that fosters respect, fosters commitment, motivation, and joy. Uh, I happen to be connected with some people, like recognized worldwide in coaching. And the person I'm referring to is Francesca Gino. And she shared her experience with Steve Kerr. I'd like to think you all know who Steve Kerr is.
He's a good one.
He's the coach of the Golden State Warriors, and his record speaks for itself. And she was talking about, like she spent time with him to understand what made his success. And he has 4 values that he developed over talking with players, talking with coaches, talking with management, and in the sport, not only in basketball, in other sports. And they're as follows: competition, compassion, mindfulness, and joy. These are the 4 values that underpin his work with his players and like the peripheral support group. And the fact of the matter is, it could be something else, but the fact of the matter that there are values that are established and that they have a clear, compelling vision of where they want to go, it allows everybody to kind of align on purpose. And that's one of the things that, like I have not been involved like Wally in all the machinations of the hockey organizations in Canada. But one of the biggest problems is this discordance between the various associations. And in my experience, the more you have something that everybody can latch on to, and it would be great to have the Canadian Hockey Association, if you want to call it that, have that clear vision and mission and the values so that parents, coaches, kids, and big time supporters, sponsors are all aligned going in the same direction.
That's where you want to go. Certainly a big job.
Tim, I wanted to bring up a point that Ray brought up yesterday. Just getting off the topic of trying to raise money for the good of the game here. When Ray talked about what he might like to talk about, and Ray, I'd like you to think about this. 2 words. One was expectation. The other
Aspirations.
Yes. Can you talk about that? Because I think the outcomes of what we want to do in anything, sport, business, it distracts us from the results. And when you discuss those 2 words, I said, okay, this adds to our toolbox of making sports a positive experience. So go ahead if you would.
I'll start with a story. Back in 1993, I was working with the Quebec Nordiques. During the playoffs, in the 4th game, they lost in overtime to Montreal. I'm in Ottawa. I get a call about 11:30. Pierre Perras says, you got to come down here. So I drive down to Montreal. I got there about 1:30. And I spent 3 hours with the coaching staff talking about, like, how do we recover? Because there was something going on in the team. And I tell you about this for one reason. I met with Jacques Martin, Don Jackson, and all those guys, but the person that should have been there wasn't there, Pierre Perras. He had me work with his coaches and scouts, but he went to sleep. And to me, that says that you have to have like the top people aligned if you're going to get somewhere. Because if you remember, Quebec went out in the last 2 games. They lost the series 4-2. So one of the things that, it took years because it was 2000 past when I worked with Montreal, and a player in particular that it was not the team that asked me to work with him, but his dad. And I worked with him, and he moved from being just a third line to first line with Zednik and Koivu, and was scoring almost every game.
Ray, I need to interrupt because the train of thought that I want us to go on is not about the individual player, but what you said about the manager not being at the meeting. It relates to everything I'm talking about. Kerry, you talk about the Royals and they don't know what they're doing up top, and management is changing all the time. So, Ray, when I advocate change, it's got to be from the bottom up, inside out, and top down, all parties. Well, if Hockey Canada is going to solve its issues, they have to take ownership of being able to stimulate interest in this cause, getting people to know their why and everybody to be there for the same why. I guess my question is, Ray, what's the difference between professional sports and amateur sports or minor hockey?
If we take out the money factor, it's the same. And the reason why, and now we can talk about sports, but it's the same thing in business. The common denominator is people. And you always have this dichotomy of thought unless there is a structured, systematic framework that allows people to all buy into one direction. And again, it happens in all venues or domains. Doesn't matter what, nonprofit, for-profit, high-tech, low-tech, education, health. It's the same thing everywhere. And to finish the aspiration versus expectation, the idea is that when we set expectations, we limit the potential that we can reach. And in sports, it happens like in a fraction of a second. When you start talking about aspirations, you liberate, you unleash the potential of the person who acts. And it's the same thing in business. Expectations set a bar. And whenever we set a bar, it's more than likely that that's all we're going to get. We're not going to get beyond. It's human frailty. So when we talk about, like the pivot, changing direction, and all that kind of stuff, we want to help somebody like an organization like Canadian Tire to buy into and to support an effort that is based on aspirations for young people to become all they can be, whether they're just a house league or organized sports or even up to the pro level.
Tim, you had your hand up earlier, Tim, and Ray. I'm just talking the same train of thought. Business is a distraction in sports, and the pro hockey appears to be distracting aspiration of some parents and players because they're focused on the outcomes too soon and they don't stick with the process. So there's a need to educate coaches, parents, and players, but then there's a need to train and educate managers, volunteer executives, given capacities that they don't have the experience this group has. So the wheel keeps spinning. Sports, we criticize one another. Hockey Alberta criticizes Hockey Canada. Every branch in the province is critical of the branch above. Every minor, every city association criticizes the province. And every minor association criticizes the city committee. And then it goes right down to the team and criticizing the coach. So a dysfunctional structure in our sports system. We need to work on leadership, not X's and O's. But if anybody has anything to add in that regard, please put your hands up and chime in. I know that Gary's frustrated. Mike's frustrated. He's trying to do the same thing. Tom Malloy has been through the changing of not able to keep his position in coaching female hockey because management changed, and he was doing the absolute right things the right way. The people didn't appreciate that. So, Ray, if you could continue with that, and if you got anything else to add, or even Carrie, sure invite. Go ahead, Ray.
Well, as you're talking about that, it makes me think of the fact that what you've described, and we're talking about Hockey Alberta, that happens when there isn't a common understanding of what the vision is and what values, like criticizing is not a value. It's not valuable because it normally puts down. Evaluating is a better word. Evaluating means getting the value out. But that doesn't happen unless there is a framework that facilitates that process. People have a tendency, and now I'm getting into the psychological part of this, is that we have a tendency to do what's called Blackout Thinking. Every situation, as a human being, we have a tendency to say, what's wrong with it? What can go wrong? Why are we doing this when? And the idea is we have to work to change that paradigm so that help people think about what else can we do or how can we improve. And that has to come from the top, like the mindset of the organization. It shouldn't be the mindset of one person. It should be the mindset of the organization is that we work to continually improve day after day.
Gary?
So one of the things over the years that I've had the good fortune of is working at all of the levels and being a part of different organizations. And one of the biggest challenges and issues that I've seen, and I'll just do a quick example. I was at a meeting that Gary Bettman was speaking, and he's the big dude with the NHL, and he was pumping everything the NHL was doing, So I put up my hand and I asked a simple question. I asked, Gary, do you think that involvement with the grassroots at all the different levels is creating hockey fans, which ultimately has the most power in North America? And I said both from a financial standpoint and an emotional fiscal responsibility standpoint. And his answer to me was pretty nearsighted because he didn't, I think I blindsided him a little, because in his mind, putting money into the junior CHL was their only involvement that was necessary to help grow a balanced development system and create hockey fans. And he basically pushed it off and just said, well, we give millions of dollars to the CHL. So when you talk about leadership in hockey specifically, some of the most important people are the people that have the most voice, and that man would be one of them. But I don't think that he understands what a group like this has actually seen, experienced, and gone through to make sure that we are growing a development system that is creating hockey fans. And so the voices and the things that get talked about here, what I've seen is that, every level, they seem to put themselves above the next level below. Yet everybody comes from being a kid and going through the process. It's been very frustrating to me to try and get a unified, I guess, message across that would create good hockey fans or create a good experience for kids all the way through, and parents and families. And it is a big problem. And, whether it's, the money it takes to put the kids on the ice, or just the simple coaching so they have a good, experience. You're so right. It has to come from the top down. It also got to come from the bottom up. But somehow there has to become a little bit better of a message and a program put in place. I think the major, if we're looking for, while you'd mentioned some of the funding, the place to go is it's got the most media attention and the most, would have the most power, I guess, to make change. That, to me, is the NHL. They have the power to make, universal change across the board.
The point, Kerry, that relates to my overall mission and the rest of my life is, Greg, you said the top down. I'd say that's important, but not as important from the bottom up. We're the bottom up. Kerry's kid is the bottom up. Kid putting on their skates for the first time is the bottom up. How they're treated, communicated with, respected in terms of the coach's ability to motivate and transmit beliefs for them to aspire starts there. And coaches can become the drivers of ethical coaching to achieve greater things. And as those coaches grow and become, those kids grow and experience that and become coaches themselves, and those coaches become board members, and they get to the top of an organization, they'll understand the why. And right now the dollar sign interferes with the why. So Mike, you had your hand up there a while ago, and I'm not sure what it was for, but I'm just going to, we're off the top here. You're down in the States, and I know that I would like to see if Peter Whitney and Jordan have anything to add, and then let Ray take it from there. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, well, originally I just had my hand up just so I want to let you know the recording stopped, so I started to record for you. But